Hey everybody, this is Jack Hammer of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, and welcome to the Overreaction Monday with my good pal Rob Shue from. He's also here on YouTube under. Check out his name, Rob Shue, and it's right there. Boom, you find him. Great channel. How you doing today, Rob?
I'm doing very well, Jack. Excited to have another win under our belts. I always feel better on a win when we get together on Mondays.
Oh yeah, the overreaction is always a lot better when that overreaction is to a victory than to a defeat.
Yes,
and
it is.
It's nice. This is the first time we've been able to do this back-to-back weeks this year.
It is. Hopefully, it's the start of a trend, my friend.
That's the hope, right? The 49ers have a big game coming up again next week in Atlanta. But before we get there, let's just kind of rewind it a little bit. Take a look at the game that just took place. Big 37-15 win in Charlotte against the Panthers. I thought this game was going to be a little bit closer than it was. Kind of started off that way, and then it got away from Carolina right around halftime.
It did, but let's be clear about that, because I think this is one of the topics that's critical to an overreaction show about this win is it was close for a time. It could have gotten uncomfortably close had things gone just a little bit differently. Thankfully, the talent difference between the 49ers defense, or at least the way they were playing on Sunday, versus Carolina's offense just skewed things in our favor. But as we were sitting there within a game that was one score, it felt again like a team that we couldn't put away. We were stacking up the yards against them, not putting the points on the board when we needed to, and still coming up with the occasional mistake on our own. I would say a game like that against better competition would have been far closer.
Yeah, it would have. And it was, what was it? It was 10-3, right? When they had the interception with just under 2 minutes to go in the first half, and that kind of blew it open. And from there, the 49ers started to roll. But it was tight early on. It's interesting because it felt like the offense was like everything was kind of going in the 49ers direction, but the score was only 10-3. But I look back at this game, and one of the as far as the overreactions, one of the first things that comes to mind, and I've seen a number of people throw this at me today, or throw it out into the Twitterverse as well, is the performance of Jimmy Garoppolo. I thought he played pretty well. How about yourself?
Absolutely thought that he played well. Seems as if things are trending in the right direction. I'm going to choose to believe that it actually mattered that he wasn't able to throw with his teammates, wasn't able to practice with his teammates, and may have contributed to one of the worst games I've ever seen from Jimmy Garoppolo coming out and playing against Denver. And now we see two back-to-back games where I'm not claiming that Jimmy Garoppolo is lighting the world on fire, nor am I saying that he's going to be a failsafe in the case of a shootout. But when I look at a quarterback capable of heading up this team that puts a very balanced roster out on the field, an incredible defense, and a run game that seems to be getting going even with Jeff Wilson Jr., I got to say, Jimmy feels like a great fit for it with the way that he's playing mistake-free.
Yeah, he's been playing really well. And no, I didn't really set that up completely for you. But the overreaction that I've seen was there was one, Jimmy Garoppolo has turned the corner. And that's kind of what I labeled this as, Jimmy Garoppolo. And as he turned the corner, and then also, I had one person tell me that Jimmy Garoppolo is a top quarterback for the overreaction. And it's an interesting one when you start looking at it, because I agree. If there's somebody that's on here that's watching us and says, you've got to be crazy to say that Jimmy Garoppolo is a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, I don't disagree with you. That's the numbers, though, they kind of do.
Right.
There are some numbers that if you look at the way the numbers fall right now, there are some things that Jimmy Garoppolo is doing really well. One of those, the one that's probably the biggest one, is the interception percentage. Jimmy Garoppolo, as a member of the 49ers, has always been around 2.7 to or higher when it comes to the interception percentage. Right now, there's only 3 quarterbacks in the NFL who have a lower interception percentage than him: Cooper Rush with the Cowboys and Tom Brady. Those are the only 2 quarterbacks in the NFL that have a lower interception percentage than Jimmy Garoppolo, who's at 0.9. And Garoppolo's touchdown percentage is better than both of those 2 as well. So, he's playing at a really high level. How far would you go with Garoppolo's performance over the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, when we throw out the idea of Jimmy Garoppolo being a top 10 quarterback, I pump the brakes on that for sure. And I'm not labeling Cooper Rush as one of those either, right? So there are statistics out there that may lend themselves towards labeling a quarterback as performing at a certain level. And certainly, again, in this small sample size, I think Jimmy is playing well over these 3 games, even when you factor in the atrocious nature of the game against Denver. But when I look at top 10 quarterbacks, to me, the top 10 list is pretty concrete. And I would argue this against most people. There are 1 or 2 names that I could see someone trying to put on this list that I don't have. But Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, this is in no particular order. Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Jalen Hurts, Matthew Stafford, and Russell Wilson, to me, feel locked in as the top 10. But you get into the next 5, again, this is my humble opinion, Derek Carr, Kyler Murray, Carson Wentz, Trevor Lawrence. I think Jimmy belongs in the tail end of that conversation, along with guys like Cousins, Tannehill, Jared Goff even. These are the kind of guys that can win a lot of games if they're in the right system and they have the right team around them. And Jimmy Garoppolo, no matter what you say about him, has proven time and time again that if you surround him with talent and you put him on an offense headed by an intelligent head coach like Kyle Shanahan, he's going to find success.
Yeah, no, he's played well. You know, it's funny when you look at Garoppolo, and I harped on him a little bit last week because it was all short stuff and he wasn't throwing the ball down the field. It was all, behind the line of scrimmage or within 10 yards. This week was a little bit different. He had 11 throws beyond 10 yards. He only completed 5 of them, but he was taking the shots. I think that helped open up the defense and helped, Jeff Wilson to get some of his big runs. And, it's always a back and forth. And like Jose says here, this is a really good one. He says, win the Super Bowl before we give him his roses. He's talking about Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo needs to win the Super Bowl before you say that he's playing well. I mean, I get it. 49ers, your quarterbacks, your top quarterbacks are always the guys that have won Super Bowls. But I think it's pretty easy to say that Jimmy Garoppolo played well yesterday without, necessarily going over the top and saying he's a top 10 quarterback.
I agree. And this just to me underscores the futility of the argument from people that want to come in and say that Jimmy Garoppolo has no value. That to me is why it's great to have this discussion, because no, he's not a top 10 quarterback. And yes, if you want to win consistently, if you want to be in that perennial chasing of a Super Bowl, you probably need one of the top 10 guys. And guess what? There's only 10 of them. So if you can't get one, you can't get one. You've got to find someone else that you can win with. And Kyle Shanahan deserves criticism for missing on some big quarterbacks that he could have had in this building if they had made a different series of decisions along the way, but they didn't. And they ended up with one that is suitable. They've got to build around it. But you also see why they took a big swing at a guy like Trey Lance, because they do want a top 10 quarterback. Everybody wants a top 10 quarterback, but when you don't have one, you got to make do with something else. And Jimmy Garoppolo is better than the rest of those 18 names that are on the list of statistics within the NFL.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to throw this one back up there just for a second, because there was a question earlier on asking why I'm always late. So I was late because I'm driving back from work and it's a long drive to get home. And I was thinking about something on the way. And during the off season, there's a guy who was a big North Dakota State fan who kept going into my Twitter mentions, and he kept telling me about how the history of North Dakota State quarterbacks and how great Trey Lance was going to be for the 49ers this year, and da-da-da-da-da. And all that made, I was driving home and I was thinking about that guy today, not because of, Trey Lance is injured or Trey Lance stinks or any of those kind of things. I was thinking about the history of the recent North Dakota State quarterbacks that have come out in the draft. Speaking of Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
What happened in year 2 of Carson Wentz's career in Philadelphia? You remember?
Year 2 was the injury.
He got injured. And then they had a backup quarterback come in. And what did they do that year?
They won the Super Bowl.
They won the Super Bowl. And I'm just thinking, it's Trey Lance. It's year 2, another North Dakota State quarterback. And this could get really interesting around here.
Couldn't it?
Jack. I don't have a lot of faith in Jimmy Garoppolo winning the Super Bowl. Let me just put that out there. I don't. No. History in this case suggests that they could. There's a lot of history, though, 50 whatever years of history that says Garoppolo, it's not going to happen, because there's never been a quarterback that's lost in his first trip and gone back and won it and not been in the Hall of Fame. Maybe Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be the first guy to do it. Who knows?
Maybe.
But that would be crazy, because that gets into so many different things that's going to just get flame me with the Trey Lance fans, because if you remember, they won the Super Bowl with Nick Foles, and then the Eagles kind of stuck with that North Dakota State quarterback, and it didn't go too well for them, and until they found somebody else. I don't want to go down that road too far.
No,
I'm starting to get myself in the weeds.
Jack, throw that truck in reverse.
Beep, 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 beep. All right, let's get this show back on the road before I start. Look at people are probably. Matt Rule sucked anyways. That's another one. But hey, Harold gets it. Harold gets it.
Harold does get it.
And it does. So I'm sorry, man. I started taking us down a road that probably gets us both in trouble. But
no, I'm rooting for it, though. I mean, what other choice do we have, right? No matter what bandwagon you are on as far as rooting for one individual player, I find myself on the 49ers bandwagon where I'm rooting for the entire organization. And right now, the organization is helmed by Jimmy Garoppolo. So I don't care what history says. I want Jimmy Garoppolo to overcome those previous historic misses and be the first quarterback to set that record.
Yeah, for sure. And then there was another one too. We were talking about the slow start, and Quesadilla Thrilla. I think he's a member of both of our channels. Always gets me hungry when I see his name come up. He says, "Jack, Rob, do y'all think that they played down to the competition, or they were gassed from the week before?" He's talking about the 49ers against the Panthers yesterday.
That was a concern for me coming into it. I noted that the 49ers defense had played 74 snaps in each of the last two contests, and it was a short week, 6 days flying across country. I think it's fair to assume that the 49ers had a little bit of a low tank situation going on there. It was a late start, which pretty much saved us in that regard. It was, a 1 p.m. Western time start, even though it was there in Carolina. So I absolutely believe that on the defensive end, they probably felt a little bit of those 74 back-to-back games.
Yeah, I know. I look at this one and I don't know if it's so. I don't think it's necessarily playing down to the competition. I don't think it's necessarily being gassed. I mean, the 49ers have so far this season, they've stumbled their way through at the beginning of games on offense, and when they could be putting up a lot more points. So that didn't change. And I think Carolina's defense is pretty good. But when we spoke on Friday on your channel, I mentioned I thought that this game was going to be it's going to be close unless the 49ers got some turnovers, maybe some some points on defense, or their defense just put them in short fields that they were able to capitalize on. That's how this game was going to become a blowout. And that's kind of what I think we ended up seeing was I don't think the 49ers were gassed. I just think that it was a matter of them playing the way that they normally play. They got a big play on their defense, which has fueled them over these last couple of weeks to victory. And then we saw the ball just start rolling downhill for them from there. Plus Carolina had some guys out as well. So
yes, they did.
That is the Jimmy Garoppolo portion of the program. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. The other one that came up, and this was first, I spend too much time on Twitter after the games, and this was, this one goes to the big injury that occurred, and it was Emmanuel Mosley's injury. And I've seen a number of people not necessarily outright blame Kyle Shanahan and say that Kyle Shanahan is to blame for it, but they're saying that Kyle Shanahan's decision not to go for it on 4th and 1 and put the defense back out there led to the Emmanuel Mosley injury. What do you make of that?
That's wild to me. And I'll be honest, where I first saw it come from is even wilder, because the first person that I saw put it out on Twitter was David Lombardi. And I think of David Lombardi as a reasonably nuanced individual that, comes forth with rational, unbiased opinions for the most part. And I get the criticism of him last year as people thought he was really taking sides in viewing Jimmy Garoppolo as the more competent quarterback to lead the 49ers last season. I didn't see it that way, but again, have always thought him to be measured. And when he put that out, I had to feel a little bit differently. I mean, I do feel a little bit differently than he does. And I guess I get it in that you go for it. You keep your defense off of the field. Of the units, the defense was the one that had been pushed with high snap counts the previous two games, as I just said a moment ago. But then you've got your offense on the field. So what if on that play, one of your starting offensive linemen gets injured? What if on the next play, Jimmy Garoppolo gets sacked and he's out for the year? On any given play, anyone can get injured. We were up by 15 at that point, right? Or afterwards, when Emmanuel Mosley is hurt, we're up by 15. All it takes is a quick score, and you're only up one score, 8 points, and it's a game again. You lose a game like that against Carolina, your season may be on the brink. So I don't fault Shanahan for the way in which he called it, and certainly don't blame him for the end result of E-Man getting injured in a game that's still within reach.
Yeah, and for it's just, this is now 2 times this year that we've seen this from well, either a person in media. I guess you could say both of them have kind of come from media. They've both been somewhat media driven, but there's also just from the fan base as well. The blame towards Kyle Shanahan for one thing for these injuries. This one to me, the Trey Lance one was one thing. This one's just like another level for me. This one, I look at this and I'm like, are you serious? Are you serious here? Because I kind of agree with you. She said, let's just play this out. It's 4th and 1. Kyle Shanahan, a lot of times in that situation, what does he do? He typically calls quarterback sneaks because Jimmy Garoppolo's pretty good at it, right? I mean, what happens if Jimmy Garoppolo runs a quarterback sneak right there and he injures his knee? Because, I mean, that's not out of realm possibility. We saw Patrick Mahomes hurt himself on a quarterback sneak in 2019.
Absolutely.
Right? What if a couple plays later you get Deebo Samuel catches a pass and hurts himself, or Mike McGlinchey gets folded over and he's out? This need to blame people for injuries is ridiculous. And I have a lot of respect for David. I think he does a lot of great work.
Yes.
This one was wild. And I know that I tweet stupid stuff out, so that's fine. I totally understand that at times. But this saying that led to the injury and you're putting them out there at more risk. I mean, come on, that's the case with if it's the offense or the defense. And
yeah, and honestly, I mean, I feel almost bad speculating this, and probably shouldn't, but I've started my thought now, so you got to complete it at that point. But you almost get the sense with David Lombardi that he's taken a lot of criticism from fans that I believe irrationally see him as some sort of a mouthpiece for the team. I think that's ridiculous. He works for one of the more prestigious outfits out there right now. The Athletic is putting out amazing content on all sports teams, but in particular, Bay Area sports teams. And I do not think that he toes the company line. I do think he's attempting to put out intelligent stuff. But I wonder if the criticism over enough period of time makes him think, well, I do need to be critical when I see fault. And this could have been one of those instances where he just kind of disagreed with it, went for a harder line on Twitter, and may have regretted it after the fact, because it does seem to have gotten some run time and does feel irrational.
Yeah, and I don't know. I have no idea why. Your what do you call it?
My hypothesis.
Thank you. Gosh, see, that's why I failed. I was not good in science in high school. But that's why I think your hypothesis, has some good merit to it. I don't know if it's right or wrong. Can't really prove it either direction. But no. It's just a wild one, and I've seen it just so much from. I'm just kind of not even going on David Lombardi anymore, but just seeing it so much from people all over the 49ers. It's interesting to me. I don't quite get it, and I'm going to go back. I'm going to spin this thing back to Jimmy Garoppolo just for a second, because I've seen so many people taking shots at Kyle Shanahan and his win-loss record and those types of things. Let's just wrap everything into both these two guys into one, maybe 2 sentences here. You have a group of people who really, really are hard on Kyle Shanahan and in some ways think that he's overrated.
Yes. You
have a lot of those same people who believe that Jimmy Garoppolo is overrated and not a very good quarterback.
Yes.
So you're telling me that a coach that's overrated is 39 and 17 with a quarterback who you feel isn't very good? but he's not good? I mean, those two and those two things don't mesh. And you have so many people that are on that track and on that train. It's wild. But
I've never laid it out as logically and rationally as that, but you just made a compelling case as to why that is completely irrational to say that both Jimmy Garoppolo is a substandard quarterback and Kyle Shanahan is an overrated coach. And oh, by the way, those two together combined for a pretty incredible win percentage.
It's wild, 39-17 is what it is when you combine their win percentage together and you include the postseason. I know they haven't won the Super Bowl, which is what it's all about.
Right.
They've been pretty. That's a pretty darn good number in the NFL.
Yes.
Real quick, Thomas De La Cruz jumps in with a super chat. He says, "Will Ward play with a cast on his hand?" Thomas, thank you for the super chat. I'll answer that one real quick, and the answer is we don't know. We don't know. Kyle Shanahan said that he's having surgery on it. He's going to be out for a period of time. They don't know what it's going to be. And the answer to that question is going to kind of determine on when Jimmy Ward returns to the team. If he can play with the club on it, then away they go.
Two questions for you, Jack. First question is, it is standard for Jimmy Ward to be out there on kickoffs. That is a standard practice for the 49ers, right? As far as formations.
I don't know. I think so, but I don't keep track of that.
Are you at all surprised by that usage? Back to this idea that I don't blame coaches for injuries, and I am a believer in, each time that you put someone out there, there is a little bit of risk. And so if I've got a starter that I think I can keep off of special teams, I'm probably going to do that. That's typically why I've invested heavily in special teams, as the 49ers have. Do you find any fault in using Jimmy Ward on a coverage unit, or are you of the school of thought, hey, best players play?
Well, you get your best players to play.
Yeah.
I don't think he's one of the guys that's necessarily expected to go down and like blow it up. I think he's kind of more of the safety valve kind of guy, one of the guys that kind of hangs back on. Somebody
with speed that can stop the breakaway.
Yeah, because back in the old day, you used to have the first guy down, he was breaking the wedge, because the way that it used to be, the return team would kind of form a wedge, and you'd send a couple of guys down. You needed a wedge
buster.
Yeah, and you had those kamikaze guys, and their job was to go down there and just blow that up, and then everybody else kind of went through that. They don't allow that anymore, so you don't necessarily have a wedge buster, but you always do have one guy that sits back as a safety to kind of help the kicker. And that would have been really helpful to have Jimmy Ward in the second half when the Panthers were turning the ball out to the midfield, though.
It would have.
All right. I'm going off track. I got the train coming. I'm going off the rails over here a little bit with my goofiness, but that's Kyle Shanahan not to blame. I don't think. When you look at this defense, they've been really good. How good do you think this defense is when you compare it to some of the best teams that have been in 49ers history, and maybe even just in the NFL in general?
I looked at this team preseason, just looking at the roster, just evaluating them on paper, and was very confident in my predictions of top 3 defense. Very big chance that this is the best defense in the NFL, making the bold prediction about the 49ers setting the sack record, right? Taking home the sack title, clearing Pittsburgh's clock in that regard after they've held it for a little while. And I felt confident about it going into the season, felt good about it. Couple of games in, felt good about it. Now I still feel good about it. When I look at the way in which this defense has performed to this point, it's one of the most special units that I've seen. The way that Charvarius Ward is playing, I saw someone throwing out, this is the best cornerback we've seen in coverage for the 49ers since. And you saw a lot of different suggestions, some as recently as Richard Sherman in 2019. And I would argue what we've seen so far, not career-wise, but just in this season versus what we saw from Richard Sherman in 2019, I would say Charvarius Ward is outplaying him. Saw mentions of Mike Rumpf. Saw mentions of, who was it that was back? Ahmed Plummer, right? And then to me, you got to go back to Deion Sanders before you're seeing the level of play that I'm seeing right now. I think it's pretty special in what we landed in Charvarius Ward, not to mention the star of this defense, which is the defensive line. That's being tested. But again, what underscores how great this defense is we're going to be down 3 starters along the defensive line if Bosa is out with that groin injury. And I still think it's going to be a ferocious defensive front. I still think they're going to get after Atlanta like nobody's business. And that's crazy, Jack, to be down 3 starters and think, yeah, we got this. You're muted, bud.
Myself. All right. Thank you for telling me I was muted.
Absolutely.
I think you're on the right track there. I think the Richard Sherman one is off. I think Travis Ward is above and beyond where Richard Sherman was during his time with the 49ers. I know he had some big plays early on in that, but what Ward does is above and beyond what Sherman did. He's not on the level of Deion Sanders, but
no,
that's the impact that he's having on the team, the defense is he's allowing them to do a lot of different things on the back end that they weren't able to do it in years past. And so Travis Ward is a big piece of it. I look at this group and I'm like, these guys are really, really, really good. I don't know how many times I can say really, but
a lot.
Just look at the numbers. The 49ers defense this season has allowed a total of 12 points in the first half of games. 12 points. That's it. Nobody else has allowed fewer than 35. I mean, they're not even in the same ballpark. And then you look at the first 5 weeks of the season, this defense has allowed 52 points. The team as a whole has allowed 61, but the defense has allowed 52. 10, that's 10, just over 10 points a game. It's wild. And I know you'd mentioned some of the injuries and those kind of things. We're going to get there in a second, but yeah. I think when you just look at this defense and you talk about 49er history, this group is on pace to be the best, I think, in 49ers history, which is going to put them up there pretty high in terms of the NFL because there's been some really good defenses in San Francisco over the years.
I agree. And it's interesting to say that without necessarily beyond Nick Bosa, where you point to a name. I guess Nick Bosa and Fred Warner are the big names that you point to. But, when you look at defenses that had the likes of the names of Ronnie Lott or Charles Haley, like you see those marquee names. And I guess the reason they feel like they have a gravitas is that they're historic names. And we look back on them with reverence. And right now, we're not looking back at history, we're watching history be made. And so it's different. The big names are being established right now. A guy like Drake Jackson or Charles Omenihu, I could easily see us 5 years from now talking about how special of a player either one of those guys are if they continue to make natural progression, because they both seem to possess pretty elite physical skill sets, and they're certainly within a scheme and underneath a coach who's going to maximize their abilities so long as they stay within the 49ers system.
No, I think what you just said is so spot on. We are potentially watching history right now with this team. I know, we're old enough to where we know the 49ers history. We watch the 49ers history that everybody refers to. What we're watching now is, if it plays out the way that we think it can, is what the younger generation is going to be talking about when they're 30 and 40 years old, 20 years down the road, right?
Yeah.
Is what we're seeing now. And I think that's what makes it such an interesting conversation, because last week I put out on Twitter on Monday night about how much fun it was to watch this team play. And I had some folks who were not liking what I had to say about that. And they were starting to tell me how great everybody else was. And what you just said is right on. We're watching the history. It's just like back in the old days with Joe Montana. Do you think that in the early 80s, everybody knew they were watching history with Joe Montana and Bill Walsh, especially in 1981, like when they started off that season 1 and 2, where they like, hey, don't worry, we're going to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
No, it's totally different.
I can definitively say that we didn't know what we had in Steve Young, because there were some people, you're looking at one of them, that rooted for Steve Bono to win the freaking job. So yeah, there was a whole different fan base. Like, it wasn't the Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance thing. It was the Steve Bono or Steve Young camp. And some of us got that wrong at an early age.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how much yes, that's all part of it. Steve and Joe and then Steve and Steve. Yes, that's all definitely right down the middle right there.
Yes, it is.
Real quick, before we a couple other things on the defense I want to hit, but Raphael 5629 comes in with the super chat. Thank you, Raphael. Member of the toolbox with that little dollar sign next to his name. And he says, should the Niners trade for a player? What do you think, Rob?
I am open to that possibility. I think you always explore ways in which to make a team better when you are within a reasonable window. And I look at this defense and I say to myself, we are within a reasonable window. Like you have every chance to do something special this year. But right now, with the specific injuries that have happened, I don't know that it's clear where the biggest need is. I think many different positions players are still rounding into form. The offensive line is still congealing to some point. And I couldn't define what the biggest need for this team might be, but I do believe that before the trade deadline hits, it will be clearer if we need reinforcements, and it'll be clearer how much more dangerous this team is than others in the NFC West, and that might entice anyone who's looking to move homes, or a guy like OBJ that you want to bring in as a free agent.
Yeah, you just mentioned, you kind of took that to OBJ into the offensive side. And, I think when Rafael asked this question, he's probably asking about the defense because of the injuries that you have over there. I'm with you. If I was the 49ers, I know there's been a big push for Brian Burns. There's a lot of people on Niners Twitter that like Brian Burns, really good pass rusher for the Carolina Panthers that we just watched the 49ers take on yesterday. If I was the 49ers and I was going to make a trade and I had an ability to bring in a really good offensive player or really good player to your team through a trade, I would go after Christian McCaffrey. I know that I understand the injury history, but Christian McCaffrey in this 49ers offense with the weapons they already have would be dynamite. And I understand like his numbers weren't great yesterday, but he's also playing with Baker Mayfield and doesn't have a very good offensive line. With the way that he runs the ball and the way I watched him run the ball at Stanford, he would be a perfect fit in this system with Kyle Shanahan. I know he has a pretty big contract, but it's not that bad for the next couple of years, because remember that signing bonus doesn't carry over. That stays with Carolina. And so it's still, in the $11 million range next year or whatever. But if you had that opportunity, Christian McCaffrey would be the guy for me.
That's a solid swing. I mean, you look at the historical ties, right? Easy Ed McCaffrey, the tie to Kyle's dad, and certainly the tie to Kyle as well. You know that Kyle's a fan of Ed McCaffrey's work habits, and those were, it would appear, instilled pretty well in his son. Christian McCaffrey, obviously an intelligent player, capable of operating successfully within a more complex offensive scheme like Kyle Shanahan. I agree with you that the money is a bit of a concern, but again, I mean, when you get into these windows, sometimes you make irrational decisions. You make big swings because the end result could be taking home that vaunted Lombardi trophy, which is significantly harder than really any members of the fan base want to admit that it is. So you take risks, much like trading 3 first-round picks for a quarterback you hope becomes the future of your franchise. If you're wrong, so what? Because if you're right, you've changed the trajectory of the entire team. Yeah,
for sure. And we'll see. I mean, I highly doubt that that's a move that's going to be made.
Right.
I don't believe the 49ers are going to make any trade. So they had a few guys in today for tryouts. A couple names that we recognize: defensive tackle Sheldon Day, and then there's a few other defensive tackles. Another one was Kevin Atkins, who was a rookie out of Fresno State that was with the team in training camp this past season. So they had a bunch of defensive linemen and offensive linemen in for workouts today. Out of the Greenbrier, I guess it was. Tomorrow they're going to have some kickers in because they're not sure what's going to be happening with Robbie Gould. So let's transition. Let's go back to the defensive side, though. You mentioned it. You mentioned the 49ers and their depth and how the defense is. Do you feel like the 49ers are going to see a downslide, especially if Nick Bosa can't play because of the groin injury, or also, they have they've lost Mosley for the season? Do you see maybe a little bit of a setback with this defense?
I mean, I do. I think it's reasonable to expect a little bit of a setback. Certainly, anytime you take the best player on the field off of the field, that's got to make an impact on what the defense is able to do. However, I do not expect it to be a dramatic drop-off. I do not think that this defense will go from best in the league to middle of the pack. The offense has to step up a little bit on their end to play that complementary style of football. Whereas before, I would have said, you know what? I don't care what the offense does. Go ahead, turn the ball over, Jimmy, because we're going to come out on defense and show them who's boss yet again. Now I don't feel quite that confident, But there are keys to this defense that make me feel better. The depth along the edge position is phenomenal. I just don't think any other team in the league has the spoils that the 49ers do and the flexibility. They've got some guys that are sliding inside right now. They're still very capable outside edge rushers. And to your point, a couple of familiar names. I would not be opposed to bringing Sheldon Day back in to clog the middle of that line as a second or third string run stopper. Phenomenal addition to a defensive line, right? You know that he's capable of eating up some bodies in the middle there. And with regard to Emmanuel Mosley, last year, this would have given me a heart attack. Last year, I would have been sick to my stomach. Because of the play of Charvarius Ward, Mooney Ward, shutting it down on the other side, even if, and this is a big if, and I hope it's an if that's not true, but even if my man Jason Verrett isn't ready to go in the near future, I still feel pretty good about this position because schematically, Charvarius Ward is playing so good that you can, in fact, leave him alone on an island over there and provide significant help to the other side. And, you know, whether it's putting Diamador Lenore outside and bringing Sam Womack into the nickel corner spot, there's just depth on this roster that there hasn't been in years past.
Yeah, I agree. And I look at this thing and I that was one of the questions that or the comments that came up today that I put in my article for the Press Democrat, you know, about for Overreaction Monday. And it's, you look at this 49ers defense, and I understand the kind of the guy that usually gets the engine started of this thing is Nick Bosa. So let's take Nick Bosa out first. Let's say, okay, but Bosa's hurt. He's not going to be able to play. The 49ers had 6 sacks yesterday, and he had none. The 49ers have 13 in the last 2 weeks. I just look at this, and you know, Bosa is definitely a big part of it, but they also have a pretty solid group of defensive linemen around him. I mean, we talked about this depth, and the depth is a big piece of this whole thing, right? So I think you kind of hit on some of the other names, but I think that defensive line, that pass rush is it might slide a little bit, but it's not going to fall off a cliff. And then you look at the back end. The back end is even better than they were a year ago. It's very similar in terms of, you know, last year Emmanuel Mosley was the main guy. When there was injuries in the secondary, he was the main guy that was the opposite corner. But you know, now it's going to be Charvarius Ward. The safeties are playing well. You have Jason Verrett, who might be able to come back and play. And if he can play, we saw how good he was in 2020 coming off the bench replacing Richard Sherman. If it's not him, then they can go to Dante Johnson. Dante Johnson has played every position in the secondary, started at cornerback for the 49ers against Green Bay in the second round of the playoffs last year when they only gave up 10 points at the Packers. You also have Samuel Womack. I don't think you're going to see Lenore bump out from the slot to the outside. I think if they do anything with those two guys, it's going to be Womack who slides out to the outside because that's what he did in college. That's also something that John Lynch had mentioned right after the draft, is that they kind of envisioned him as more of an outside corner anyway. And then on top of that, you have one more guy, Ambry Thomas.
Yes.
Can still, and Ambry Thomas played corner for you for most of the second half of last season and played for you all the way through the NFC Championship game. And they were able to do a pretty good job with those guys. And so I think you're going to see the defense. It might not hold you to 12 points in the first quarter for the next 5 weeks if those guys are, if both, say Bosa, you know, Bosa's out along with, but they're still going to be good enough to kind of win. And then, like you said, Jimmy Garoppolo needs to show that he can win some games too.
I agree. And it sounds as if the language that I'm hearing for Bosa, that there's at least a chance that he doesn't miss time, right? I would wager that they're conservative with him. Groin injuries, you know, as evidenced by his brother, who's at the more extreme end of it, having to go get surgery and being shut down, put on IR. I could see the 49ers being conservative with Nick Bosa, in particular, coming up against Atlanta, another game where the 49ers will be heavy favorites going into it. But the language I'm hearing gives me optimism that Nick Bosa's injury may not be as severe, may not cause him to miss multiple games.
Yeah, well, it was basically we'll find out on Wednesday. We'll reevaluate it on Wednesday. Right. And so that's the deal with both him and Robbie Gould. So some injuries there to deal with, but right now, I think the 49ers, we went into this season talking about, at least I did, you probably were too, but there was a lot of talk. I know for me, I kept talking about how deep this roster is from the 53 onto their practice squad. It's getting tested, but it's also, I think, going to show that we're probably pretty accurate on that, because as long as Deebo Samuel and Jimmy Garoppolo and Mike McGlinchey and some of these other guys stay healthy, they can absorb these injuries that they've lost so far. They just can't. The biggest one is the Garoppolo piece. They can't lose their starting quarterback. I know that he needs help from everybody else, but he's the big piece at this point right now.
Yeah, he's a critical component. There are a couple of players that if you lost them, it would be very difficult to overcome. And certainly with Jimmy Garoppolo having Brock Purdy as his backup, I would label Jimmy Garoppolo as one of those linchpins.
Yeah, and then the next piece that I wanted to ask you about was George Kittle. How do you feel about George Kittle's usage after yesterday's game?
I thought we saw what a lot of people, myself included, were calling for, which was, hey, let's get George Kittle intentionally involved in the game plan and scheme him open, force the ball to him, because he's an important part of this offense. And if you don't get him involved, we are a less versatile, less dangerous unit on the field. I understand that it felt like we were leaning on that heavily. I thought the end result was a good game for George Kittle. I think it's necessary. Kittle is a Swiss Army knife piece within this offense. And if he is not being used successfully within the pass game, I think it allows defenses to play the 49ers differently. So it may have been somewhat painful watching the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan and Jimmy Garoppolo sort of intentionally force the ball to Kittle, and it may not have been super efficient in doing so. But my belief is it sets up things for the future. It widens the scope of this offense going forward, and I think it will pay dividends. It's one of those, much like working on Brandon Ayuk early on in the season last year, that ended up showing dividends. I see this as a similar track.
Yeah, I look at this one, and for me, I look at it a little bit differently. I guess this is where I look at it from a skeptical point of view. Yeah, because we had so much get the ball to George Kittle. I mean, it was nice they got the ball to him right away, so that kind of quieted everybody down. But in the grand scheme of things, he got 2 more targets. All that noise for 2 targets. 2. Just 2. He went from 4 to 6. So, but it was nice to see him get involved early. It was nice to see him the catch down the left sideline from Jimmy Garoppolo. That was really nice to see. They need more of that from George Kittle. It would have been even better if Garoppolo got the ball out of his hand quick enough so that Drake Brendel wouldn't get downfield on that one RPO down in the red zone, and it would have put him down at their own. I think it would have been down to like the 3 or something like that. That would have been nice to see that play out instead of having to kick a field goal right there. But yeah, it was good. It was good to see George Kittle get involved, and I should be less of a skeptic because it was 2 more.
It was, and when you're going from 4 to 6, Jack, that's a 50% increase. I mean, maybe only 2, but that's a sharp increase.
You know what? If I went from 4,000 to 6,000, like if somebody wanted to give me that in my paycheck, I wouldn't be complaining. So
that's right.
I should rethink with the way I'm looking at this thing. Real quick, I want to bring this one up from Quesadilla Thriller. He put this one up a little while ago. He's a member of the Toolbox. This was an interesting one. He says, Jack and Rob, I'm starting to think Jordan Mason might have fell out of favor with Kyle. What's your take?
My take is absolutely. I mean, there is some reason that Kyle Shanahan does not trust Jordan Mason. And let's be honest that when it comes to young running backs, that's often the case for Kyle Shanahan. He has typically been hesitant to thrust those younger backs into significant roles until forced to do so by injury, and then only leaves them there in extended duty when they do what Elijah Mitchell did, which was take that opportunity and, very literally run with it and show everyone that you deserve it. So Jordan Mason, I mean, this may have been showing up in practices because you've mentioned this on my program, but there have been comments that you can suss this out a bit. You can tell that they want to make sure Jordan Mason can actually do what we saw him do in preseason underneath the big lights. And there must be some reason they feel he cannot, because when Kyle Shanahan does trust you, he does things like he will with other veteran backs that he's bringing back in and thrusting into the limelight.
Yeah. What about old Tevin Coleman? Man,
Tevin Coleman?
I will have to get there in just a second, but real quick on this one, just to answer your question, Quesadilla. I think that I'm not going to say that he's fallen out of favor with Kyle. I don't think that it's necessarily him falling out of favor. I don't think he was ever in favor with Kyle in terms of being his pass blocking ability. I think that's what's keeping him off of the field. They like him a lot. They feel like he's earned the right to be on the team, help him out on some special teams and stuff. Well, he's learning how to be a better pass blocker. I think that's why we're seeing him not get the reps, and why we saw Tevin Coleman starting, getting those reps in his place instead over these last 2 weeks. So I think that's the difference there. Tevin Coleman, though, really quick before I know we only got a few more minutes left, but Tevin Coleman, where did he come from anyway?
I mean, I think came off the street, right? Yeah, no, Tevin Coleman, just looking good out there. Good hands, still looking like he's got his legs underneath him. I mean, I saw burst when he was out there. I have to say that I didn't see him dropping off from what I remember in 2019 to now. I might actually argue that this was a more efficient performance than I had seen in some of those games in 2019. He was obviously used differently. In 2019, he seemed to have that softener role wherein everyone was playing up on the line against the Niners offense that year, and Tevin Coleman was constantly run into 8-9-man fronts, and it was 4 yards and a cloud of dust all season long. This was an illustration of his soft hands, the way in which he was able to catch that one along the sideline. I was impressed by Tevin Coleman, the ferocity with which he was running. I think he's a good compliment while we are down a couple of backs.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, he's still kind of the softener guy, but Jeff Wilson Jr. is kind of that way too. Players right now have two bruisers as guys that are willing to stick their nose in there and run over people as their running back group, because that's really all they're using is those two guys. And but for Tevin Coleman, you mentioned the one run around the right side. That was really nice. He took that thing and you could see when he saw a hole, he had a nice burst and got out there and was able to get up the field for a nice gain. And both those two, the pass on the left sideline, that was a nice ball by Garoppolo, but really good job by Coleman to be able to go up and grab that thing right over the top of basically off the helmet of the Panthers defender right there. A really good shot there on this part.
That was absolutely a pretty catch.
Yeah, for sure. And then there was a super chat over here I wanted to hit really quick before we. Darn it, I'm losing it. I'm getting to it. There we go. Boom. Harold comes in with a super chat. Big Harold Murillo, friend of the program, says, are the Eagles the best in the NFC? Can the Flyers beat them? What do you think?
Man, I struggle with this one. I did not want to admit it early in the season. I did not want to place Philadelphia atop the NFC. And I'll be honest that I'm still skeptical. I believe that they will be a different team when they come up against significantly better competition. And you are what your record says you are. And the Eagles are currently undefeated. So I've got to give them the nod right now. They certainly could be the type of team like the 49ers were in 2019, where they're legitimately dangerous and they're sort of coming out of nowhere. And people who aren't as familiar with the team that they built don't realize the level of talent that's on there. Because I've got to say, this feels like a very stacked defense and an offense that can absolutely burn you through the pass, but also has a stout run game with the additional threat of Jalen Hurts. That's a tough recipe. That's playoff winning football right there. So I think the Eagles are legitimate. They are a top 3 team in the NFC for me right now. I don't know that I'm giving them best in the NFC. I still almost want to label us as the best in the NFC, even though I know that's slightly wrong with our record.
No, here's the thing is I think that the Eagles are the team that the 49ers want to be. The way that they're going about their business on offense is what the 49ers wanted to do. Yeah. They wanted to have the 1-2 punch with the running back and the quarterback in the running game. They wanted to have the quarterback make some big plays with his arm every once in a while. I think where the Eagles are right now is what the 49ers envisioned with Trey Lance as the quarterback. Right. And, you mentioned the other pieces. That defense in Philly isn't a joke. They're pretty darn good themselves. They're not far off of where the 49ers are. And it kind of goes back to last year. Remember early in week 2, nobody really knew who the Cardinals or the Eagles were. 49ers offense struggled in that game, but the Eagles defense was pretty good throughout the year last year and really helped get them into the playoffs. And it's carried over. And I think we'll see where this trend, where this goes. I think we're headed towards a 49ers. If I was to make a bet today in Vegas on who's going to be playing the NFC Championship game, I would say it's going to be the 49ers and the Eagles. I think they're the best 2 teams in the NFL. On the NFC, they have the best defenses, and their offenses are very similar in the way that they go at it. And I think it pays off when you get into the playoffs. Run the ball, play good defense. That's how you win a lot of playoff games.
I will say this, if the Niners defense had a guy like, I don't know, say Fletcher Cox instead of Javon Kinlaw in the middle, like that would be just scary. That would be ridiculous.
Hey, the 49ers don't need either one of those 2. They have Kevin Givens in the
middle.
They
have Kevin Givens.
And Kevin Givens is the guy. He's 49er fans are kind of starting to come on to what he can do, but he's an undersized guy. He's quicker than heck. He makes plays against the run. He does a pretty good job, in the pass rush as well. He's pretty solid. I don't know if there's anybody really off of anybody's team that I would say the 49ers need to add to that group to make their defense better. I really like that group. I think they have a lot of guys. And I know you're not trying to say that. But.
It's a special unit, and I take nothing away from it.
Yeah, for sure. That's it, unless you have something else that you have, like some other crazy overreaction you want to throw at me. Because
crazy overreactions. My crazy overreaction is that I'm not changing my opinion on this 49ers team. I came into this season saying this defense had the potential to be top in the league. I was wildly confident it'd be a top 3 unit. I feel like that's been proven to be true through this far in the season. And I will say that as long as some of these injuries come back, which we would expect that these guys continue to heal, and we don't see too many, I see this roster, this team, the chance that we have this year, and the story that it would be in hindsight as being a special one. And I just encourage everyone who's watching it unfold to appreciate it. Appreciate the ups, appreciate the downs, appreciate the freaking ride. Because you don't want to go through a season like this as a naysayer, as someone who didn't enjoy the games, who didn't feel that wild emotion of it, and then look back 10 years from now and say, oh, you know what? I didn't get to be a part of the most special defensive season in 49ers history. No, get on board now and be a part of the freaking bandwagon.
There you go, Rob. And I'm gonna channel my inner Jeff Kent. He used to play with the Giants, the San Francisco Giants, and he went on the radio one day and he was complaining about all the guys on the radio and the fans complaining about the team, even though they're winning. Just enjoy the game. Enjoy the game more. I agree with that a lot. It's my job to be nitpicky. It really is. But even I have a hard time with some of the nitpickiness because I think this is a really special team, and it's a little bit of a challenge for myself to come at this thing from a negative angle, because I just the things that I've seen people bring up as negatives, I don't get it. It doesn't, those aren't really negatives to me. This is a really good football team with a head coach that knows what he's doing, a quarterback who struggles but wins a lot of games, a defense that's one of the best in the league, and it's tracking on one of the best that we've ever seen. It has a guy in Deebo Samuel who just does stuff that we haven't seen in 20 plus years in terms of the ability to run and catch and do all the things that he does. And it's just a really special group. Are they going to win the Super Bowl? I don't know. It takes a lot of luck at the end of the day to get there. But this is a team that can definitely cause a lot of trouble, and let's have some fun. And if they lose on Sunday in Atlanta, we're going to come on here. We're going to have a lot of overreacting to do. But
yes,
I kind of mentioned, not even a little bit jokingly, but I think this team can win 12 games, 11 games for sure with this roster, with the teams that they have in front of them, playing those games at home. This is going to be has a potential to be a very solid year for the 49ers. So let's get on board with it and have a lot of fun with it. And when things go bad, we can hammer those out. But right now, And I think most of us know where those weaknesses are, right? Like we know that the weaknesses are in Jimmy Garoppolo throwing deep. We know that, left tackle is a little bit of a weakness right now. There's no need to keep, no pun intended here, hammering it over and over again.
Hammer those weaknesses. And we know that depth is being tested, right? The 49ers can only overcome so many more key injuries, and then you will be decimated by it. The hope is that the averages play out for them, that, hey, we have suffered a few to this point. Let's hope that we get a good run of some healthy games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned it yesterday at the beginning. This is the time where we're going to get to start to see what this 49ers team really is about, because they have games in front of them that you're supposed to win. And if you're a really good team, you win those games. So that's where, they've got one here. They got next one up on Sunday against Atlanta. So good teams win these games, and we'll see how it goes. Quesadilla Thriller comes in, says, Jack, Rob, love both y'all shows. The content, the point of view are amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Quesadilla. And thank you, Rob. I know you got to get jumping out, but I want to say thank you for coming on here on Monday with me. It's always a lot of fun.
Absolutely. It is always my pleasure to be here on the program. I am thrilled to be a guest, and we'll have my mailbag coming up on my channel tomorrow. Nothing on the channel tonight. I do have plans, but tomorrow at 5 on the channel will be the mailbag. Look for the Twitter handle, The Left Shoe, for that tweet to go out in the morning. Yep.
Hit up Rob's channel at Rob Shoe on YouTube here. Before you head out, like Raphael 5629ers always reminds me, hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button, and then hit the little bell notification. And then last but not least, get yourselves over to 49ers.pressdemocrat.com, inside the 49ers blog. New stuff goes up every day over there. So check it out. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your Monday. Enjoy the night. We'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.
Cheers.
Cheers.